Penn State advances to the Final Four of the college football playoffs. They take down Boise State and Ashton Jeanty 31-14. And I know, judging by the scoreboard, this looks like it was a complete one-sided affair. But you know, Boise State, you got to give them credit. They hung around in this game. This was a pretty competitive game from the start of the third quarter to early in the fourth quarter, when Penn State broke it open with that big touchdown one that they had by Nicholas Singleton. It went for 56 yards. But what really impressed me about Boise State, before I get into Penn State, I want to give praise to Boise State because, look, it's easy to hammer on these G5 schools, say that they're taking up a playoff spot, they don't belong here. At one point in this game, I felt like Boise State had a chance. You know, it's just that when you're at a disadvantage from a talent standpoint, you got to be perfect, okay? And Boise State was far from perfect. They had 4 turnovers. You had 2 fumbles by Ashton Jeanty. One of them got recovered by one of his offensive linemen. Their quarterback, Madsen, threw 4 interceptions. 3 of them came when the game was actually, you know, in its crucial moments. The 4th one, the game was already out of reach. They also had a lot of penalties. Anytime it felt like Boise State made a great play, it always got called back. And, you know, it just was really tough for Ashton Jeanty to even get more than a yard in this game. I mean, Penn State, they knew what the assignment was. They were playing like some dogs. Every time Ashton Jeanty got the ball, they were... I'm talking about they're swarming at Ashton Jeanty. I'm like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, holy. I mean, they're swarming Ashton Jeanty. I'm talking about every time Ashton Jeanty got tackled, it wasn't by just 1 or 2 players. It was like 5, 6. It was like a whole swarm of Penn State players just coming for Ashton Jeanty, trying to eliminate this brother from the game. And this was the worst performance of the season that we've seen Ashton Jeanty put up. And it wasn't really his fault. I felt like he played a pretty good game because it's like, if you watch this game, there were several runs that he had that were like 5, 6 yards where he's breaking out of 2, 3 tackles. This is a generational back. If you are somebody that keeps up with the NFL draft, Ashton Jeanty is a top 5 player coming out. This is one of the best running backs I've ever seen in my entire lifetime covering college football and covering the draft. This is a special running back. And James Franklin and company, you know, I'm not going to say that they didn't really care about anybody else on Boise State's offense, but you definitely knew that their game plan was centered around eliminating Ashton Jeanty out of this ball game. And when they did, Boise State, they had to dig deep into their playbook. They had to kind of find more creative ways to sustain drives offensively. And they did that. You know, they had a few good drives. It's just that they couldn't finish them off. You get inside the red zone, you get nothing. You can't even get a field goal. And Penn State, for a team that, I'm going to be honest, I felt was overrated for the majority of this season. You know, watching them these last 2 weeks against Boise State and SMU, they just look like a man amongst boys. They have a lot of athleticism. They have a very physical defense. And remind you that they won this game by more than 2 touchdowns despite Abdul Carter, their best player, not just on defense, but on the entire team, pretty much only playing like a few minutes of this game because he ended up sitting out the rest of it with the injury. I felt like he could have came back, but James Franklin and company felt like they had the game under wraps. And Penn State, you know, offensively, after they went up 14-0, they kind of started to kick themselves in the foot. They had a fumble, but you know, overall, you saw just how good Penn State is based off the fact that they can beat you a multitude of different ways. They can either carve you up through the air with Drew Waller and Tyler Warren. You also have a really great ground game. And I was surprised that Tyler Warren won MVP of this game. I felt like they should have gave it to Kaytron Allen because, look, you talk about how good of a back Ashton Jeanty is. I mean, Kaytron Allen, how about this guy? He also is one of the best running backs in college football. 134 rushing yards. He was averaging 7.9 yards per attempt. It seemed like every time Kaytron Allen got his hand on the football, he was making guys look silly out there. I thought at one point we was going to have to call the fire department out there with the fire that Kaytron Allen was playing with on that field, because it looked like Boise State did not want to tackle this brother, and I can't blame them. But Nicholas Singleton, his big 56-yard touchdown run in the fourth quarter is what put this game on ice, and Penn State was just way too much for Boise State. You know, they just had more athletes than what Boise State had. And overall, they were just so dominant up front that the only way Boise State was going to be able to win this game was by airing it out. And that's not the style or the brand of football that got Boise State to this point. You know, you have to stick with what got you here. And what got Boise State to this point is that Ashton Jeanty has been so dominant. And I took Boise State plus 10.5 based off how well they played against Oregon. But you know what I kind of was missing with Boise State is that you play Oregon early during the season. And the best chance to pull off an upset against a team that has a significantly large talent gap over you is that you play them early where they still got a lot of kinks to work out. And they were lucky enough that they only lost to Oregon by 3 points. So if they were to play Oregon again, I feel that's a different ball game. And Ashton Jeanty balled out in that game, which is why it was close. But in this game, he didn't even score a touchdown. This is probably the only game I've watched out of Ashton Jeanty where you just didn't really see a lot of explosive runs. His biggest run of the night went for 26 yards. You know, this is a Penn State defense that has only allowed one 100-yard rusher, that being USC running back Woody Marks, all season long. This has been a stout defense. You couldn't run it in the middle of Penn State's defensive line, and you couldn't get it outside and bounce it outside the tackles on the edge. I was talking to somebody early. He was like, why doesn't Boise State call more outside zone runs? Why are they not calling toss plays? Because it just was a complete mismatch up front. You know, you're better off just trying to run it up the middle than losing 5-6 yards because it gets blown up running an outside style run. You know, hats off to Boise State. They had a great season. I commend them on the effort in this game, but Penn State is a scary football team right now. I was wrong about this team. I was wrong about James Franklin. I still have my doubts about him because he has had the easiest path out of all of the teams still in the playoffs, but you know, you want to see Penn State dominate the teams that they are supposed to dominate, and they've done that 2 straight weeks in a row now. So I'm looking forward to seeing who they play, rather it be Notre Dame or Georgia. I think that there's a very good chance that we do see Penn State in the national championship this year. And you know, overall, this was just a well-played game by Penn State. Even when it looked like Boise State was going to find a way to get back in it, it seemed like every time Boise State was crawling to make this a one-possession game, Penn State would pull the rug from underneath them and say, nope, you got to be quicker than that. You remember that Progressive or Allstate commercial when you had the fisherman with the $1 bill, and he's taunting somebody like, ooh, you got to be quicker than that. Ooh, you got to be quicker than that. That's kind of what Penn State was. It's like anytime you felt Boise State was going to be able to make this a real ball game, they were going to get you high. You were about to say, oh, crap, Boise State might actually win this. Penn State would just put the hammer down. And that's what an elite team looks like. You know, it seemed like Penn State didn't have to put in as much work to win this game as what Boise State did. Look how long Boise State's drives were. They were having like 6-7 minute drives and coming up empty. Meanwhile, Penn State could score with what, 5-6 plays? That's why we aren't going to see a Cinderella team ever win the college football playoffs. The only Cinderella team that has a shot to win it all are one of those teams that's from a P4 conference that wouldn't have gotten a at-large bid, and they had to win their conference championship game as a 3-loss team, like what Clemson did. You feel me? So for Boise State, I commend them on the effort. I'm not going to down them, make it seem like they didn't belong here, because this was a pretty competitive game, in my opinion, for the most part, regardless of the score. But Penn State just had too many dogs out there for Boise State to handle.